The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings really came into their own in media around 2001 with the Peter Jackson films. But do you realize that they've been trying for a while? These stories have been trying to make a mark in video games since 1982. Today we're going to take a look at some of the games centered around Middle-earth. I'm Ollamh, and welcome to Geek Trivia. The earliest official game to feature Middle-earth was a game based on the book The Hobbit. Unsurprising that you play as one Bilbo Baggins. This game was mostly text-based, with the player describing what they wanted to do and where they wanted to go. It wasn't universal on the pictures that were used for areas, though. If you were playing the tape version, the graphics were outlined and then flood-filled, though disc version used fully pre-rendered and higher quality images. This game was interesting for a few reasons. It had a real-time function, so you had to decide what you were going to do quickly, or Bilbo would automatically wait. You could enter the command pause to stop the action, though. It also featured a physics system. Objects had a determined size, weight, and solidity, so they could be placed inside other items, and even damaged or broken. Now, not everything with this game was good. Major characters would sometimes wander around the land. Gandalf could be found in any of the 50 locations and had a life away from the story. Random creatures could be captured, and you would find yourself in prison with enemies, such as a warg. And Gollum would at times roam around and play his riddle games with others and wind up strangling them from behind. Also, there was the mysterious threat of the pale, bulbous eyes, which Bilbo had to run from or be killed by. Now, I always pictured, being a child of about 6 when I first played this game, just a floating, pale eye that stared you to death. This game also created a bit of a joke about Thorin. Anytime Bilbo waited, and there were times where you had to wait a lot in the game, there was a pretty good chance that Thorin would pass the time by sitting down and singing about gold. Now, this was not the only book in the series to get this game treatment. In fact, the creators, Melbourne House, would go on to complete the series with Lord of the Rings Game 1, The Shadows of Mordor Game 2 of the Lord of the Rings, and finally The Crack of Doom. Though these games were made by the same people, they never quite reached the acclaim of The Hobbit, in part due to the removal in Lord of the Rings Part 1 of the real-time element. Melbourne House weren't content with just doing text-based games, though. In 1988, they released a real-time strategy game called War in Middle-earth. There were both large-scale army units and individual characters, and everything in the game happened simultaneously. Due to the limits of computing power, you could only watch a battle if the unit count was 100 or less. Now, reviews were generally mixed, as the actual strategy used in the game was quite minimal. In 1990, Interplay stuck their fingers into the series with their role-playing games. Because there wasn't much Interplay wouldn't stick their fingers in back then. It was a very common RPG style, kind of like the Ultimate series. The portraits take a bit of an artistic license on the characters, but given the time and technological constraints of the time, it wasn't a bad game. There was a sequel to this game released in 1992, but other than a Konami release of Riders of Rohan, that was all we had until the Jackson era came upon us. Suddenly, everyone seemed to want to get into the series, including Sierra, Electronic Arts, Turbine, and of course, Warner Brothers Interactive. Between 1982 and 1992, 10 years, there were 8 official games released. Between 2002 and 2014, 12 years, there were a total of 24 officially licensed games, with more announced and on their way. Some of these take a look at stories other than the Bagginses and their allies, such as the Middle-earth Shadow series and Lord of the Rings Online. Needless to say, Peter Jackson's movie adaptation has, whether you like them or not, had a major impression on Middle-earth and games. With 3 times the games being licensed and produced, it's a good time for lovers of hobbits, elves, dwarves, and even humans. Though maybe not the best of times for anyone else. So what do you think of the games featuring Middle-earth? Have you played any of them, or are fantasy games not really your thing? Which ones do you particularly love? Let us know by leaving a comment down below, sending us a tweet, or posting to our Facebook page. We always love hearing what others have to say about the topics we choose. As always, thank you very much for watching. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button so that you can stay tuned for more from Ollamh Productions.
If you wanna see some crazy, so lazy, then you should meet me and my friends.
Really? We're gonna put a boot on there, and it's gonna somehow... That's not family friendly!
He calls his sister an EMT, who gives us a bit of background that he's not terribly stable mentally.